So I'm Cynthia Lazaroff, and I want to warmly welcome you all to our first dialogue. I'm so deeply honored to have each and every one of you with us here today. You are an extraordinary group of women, awake to what's at stake, and above all, you care. So with all of my heart, I want to thank you for saying yes to this, to life, to our capacity to transform our nuclear legacy. And I want to give a special thanks to Nadezhda, Nadia Azhgikhina, and to my lifelong mentor, Colette Schulman. This gathering would not have been possible without them. Nadia, from the moment I met you at the end of 2019, you said, yes, I will do this with you. And so here we are. You've shared your hopes and your dreams and invited your remarkable friends to be with us. And Colette, as always, thank you for your insight and wisdom and counsel and for bringing Nadia into my life. We wouldn't be here without you. We wouldn't be here without Nadia. We also wouldn't be here without the Plowshares Fund Women's Initiative, and I'm deeply grateful to them for their generous support for women transforming our nuclear legacy. So I just want to start by saying, why are we here? Why are we all gathered here? For me, this is personal. After the Berlin Wall came down, I thought I could stop worrying about nuclear war. All of that changed for me in 2017 when I went to work on this film, and I interviewed dozens of top experts on nuclear dangers in the US and Russia. Everyone awakened me to today's staggering nuclear danger. The two who had the greatest impact on me were former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and our US former Secretary of Defense, William Perry. Secretary Perry said to me that today the risk of a nuclear catastrophe is greater than it was during the Cold War, and most people are blissfully unaware of this danger. That because we don't understand the dangers, we make no serious attempt to repair the hostility between the United States and Russia. So we're allowing ourselves to sleepwalk into another catastrophe. We must wake up. President Gorbachev said that our relations have been going from bad to worse, that if a confrontation breaks out, we will kill everyone and destroy the planet. Just weeks after sitting with Gorbachev, I came home to Hawaii, and I was one of over 1 million people across the Hawaiian Islands who all got this message on our cell phones: ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. After receiving confirmation from a local journalist that our county officials were telling us to take shelter, I spent the next 38 minutes trying to prepare my family to survive a nuclear attack. Where do you go? There are no designated nuclear shelters in the state of Hawaii. People were running through the streets with nowhere to go, some forcing their children into storm drains. Where are your loved ones? Can you get to them? Our younger daughters were 7 miles away. My partner was racing down the road trying to get to them, with other drivers speeding around him. What do you take with you? I looked at my phone and it had 12% charge. And I thought, oh my God. I grabbed a bag and started throwing things in it: my phone charger, my computer charger, my purse, my passport. And then I thought, will I even need any of these things? Then I grabbed this shawl to wrap around my face to protect myself from radiation. And I thought, will this even help? And then I thought about food and water for my family. And I looked on the shelf and I had 2 small bottles of water. We were supposed to have 1 gallon of water per day per person for 14 days and enough food for 14 days. And I thought, I've done nothing to prepare my family for this. How many minutes do you have? We had no idea. Who do you call to say goodbye? For me, it was my daughter in LA. And as I was racing to shelter in a cave, I called her and I said, Mackenzie, we've all gotten a message on our cell phones that we're going to be hit by a nuclear missile. And I just want you to know I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. At that moment, time stopped for me. I didn't want to let her go. And I thought, will I ever see her again? I thought, is this one nuclear missile from North Korea, or is this many nuclear missiles? The beginning of that accidental nuclear war with Russia that President Gorbachev and Secretary Perry and all the experts were so worried about. Is this the beginning of the end of life as we know it, of everything and everyone we know and love and cherish on this earth? This is why this is personal for me. And this is why I'm here today. Even with everything I knew about nuclear weapons, nuclear war was unimaginable to me until I went through those 38 minutes. Now this experience lives inside of me as a mother, as a human being. It's in my gut, and it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. I have no illusions about the formidable obstacles in the way of achieving this. But one thing is clear. If we're to make any progress towards this goal, the US and Russia, the two countries who possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, must take the lead. China has made it clear they will not consider reductions in their arsenals until the US and Russia come down to their level. So despite deep political differences and the high toxicity in US-Russia relations, we must act now to rebuild our relationship and restore the dialogue and trust necessary to reduce the risk of blundering into a nuclear war, resume reductions in our nuclear arsenals, and ultimately end the arms race and achieve total disarmament as mandated by Article 6 of the NPT. Since the dawn of the nuclear age, women have been largely shut out of nuclear policymaking, negotiations, and peace-building processes. Yet when women are involved, the research shows peace becomes more possible. Excluding women, half of the human race, for much of the nuclear age, has brought us to the brink of possible extinction. Today, it's an existential imperative that women come forward to claim their seat at the table and lead the quest to eliminate nuclear weapons. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. We're a small group of women, mostly citizens from the two countries with over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. Our lives are at stake. We have a moral responsibility to humanity, to all future generations, to act now." My prayer is that the seeds that we plant here today blossom and grow to include women all across Russia, the United States, Belarus, and all over the world, that we all claim our seats at the table and we abolish nuclear weapons from the face of the earth forever. So may it be so. Welcome you all again. And I now want to welcome my dear friend, beloved elder here on the island of Kauai, Kumu Hula Puna Dawson, who will open our session with a blessing. Puna travels the world, sharing the spirit of aloha, building bridges for peace between the peoples of other countries and the peoples of the Hawaiian Islands. And I just want to welcome you, Auntie, as my teacher, my friend, and say aloha and mahalo for being with us.
Aloha, everyone. I'm so honored and blessed to be in the presence of all of you. I want you to take the time, please, to put your hands in front of your mouth, just like I am, right here. Breathe into your hands. Breathe into your hands. Lift those hands up. We are now circling the whole earth with our breath. This breath is now throughout the world. Yes. We are one breath, one intention of peace. I bless nothing. We all are part of the blessing because we come together to bring what is necessary as women of the world, as mothers, grandmothers, aunties. We're the nurturing fabric of peace. All of us have a value, and the value is a connection that we have with one another. In my culture, that word aloha is in every culture. The understanding of appreciation in akahai. Akahai is to be kind. Akahai is to be conscious and careful and caring. Kindness begins in loving yourself, caring for yourself first, so that you can do all that is necessary in the work, in the perseverance that's necessary for us to accomplish and be this blanket of truth and peace. Lokahi in that word aloha is all of us coming together as one family with one prayer in mind of continuing to have this earth and its earth's people for all the generations that come. In that word, aloha, olu olu. Olu olu is necessary for us to be able to hear and appreciate the diversity of the world that we live in. That there is value in every single culture. And we can be the fabric to help to bring all of that together. Ha'a ha'a in that word aloha is to understand and appreciate the differences, to be humble enough to say that we as individuals don't have all the answers, that we need one another. We need to be able to love, trust, and appreciate the differences that we all share and find the commonality to create what is necessary for our world to continue to exist. And the last letter in that word aloha, aho nui. Thank you all for having the patience to be who you are, to do the things that you do, because aho nui is what has gotten us here to this place. Being people of the world, being mothers, and nurturing, let us all come together and continue to be the blanket of peace that we can envelop our earth in all these things we say. Aloha. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Puna, for that beautiful blessing and sharing for all of us and bringing us all together in the breath as we start the session today. I'd now like to call on Nadezhda, who is going to introduce our first honored speaker today. So Nadezhda, I welcome you to introduce Svetlana Alexievich.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It is a great honor for me to introduce Svetlana. Svetlana is an amazing writer, human being, an amazing woman, not only because she is a Nobel Prize winner in literature. Svetlana has started a new genre and a new perception of the world. It so happened that the perception of tragedies, be it a war and its consequences, or a completely new threat, a nuclear threat, in the form of literature that she has created, a document and poetry at the same time, found residence with a lot of people. We have all read maybe a chapter or maybe more, the entire thing. This is one of the best of her writings. It is called the Chernobyl Prayer. We're still living through this, and we understand that it is only the word of truth about what people are feeling has the capacity to touch the hearts of the people and to change the world for the better. I'm very happy that Svetlana is with us here today.
Thank you. Beautiful.
I'm happy that she is with us. It's a big honor. So, Svetlana, включите микрофон.
Svetlana, the floor is yours. I'm very happy to be with you and to speak about the people that have been of the greatest concern to me for the past several decades. After Chernobyl, it was only a few days later that it became clear that Belarus had suffered the greatest. As a matter of fact, we've gone through a nuclear war that was extended in time. Hundreds of radionuclides that are on our land will take hundreds or even thousands of years to die. So this was a kind of rehearsal for apocalypse. And I remember my first impressions when I was in the Chernobyl zone, when the soldiers were moving in and they had their machine guns. There were helicopters with weaponry. So every person in Chernobyl thought that in this way they could overcome Chernobyl. We did not know how to fight another war and how to win it. And I remember myself traveling along those roads with blossoming orchards on each side. When I walked along the river and I saw the herds of cows, the cows would turn away their faces from that water. They wouldn't drink it. And I was thinking that here is another world and another threat. I cannot hear it because our ears are not meant to hear radiation. We don't know what it is. I cannot see radiation. I cannot smell it. So Chernobyl became a borderline to a new reality, to a new world. And as we understand it now, after the COVID pandemic, it is becoming increasingly a part of our lives. This is the world we will have to be living in from now onwards. People were not prepared for that at that time. And I remember people who were highly educated and very simple folks, they kept saying, I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, I've never read anything about it. And maybe only now, very recently, people can say after Chernobyl and Fukushima that we know what kind of world that we find ourselves in. We know how to live in it. I don't know if it affected our art or philosophy. If it had been understood, then maybe 20 years after Chernobyl, when Belarus suffered the greatest, they would not be building a nuclear power station in Belarus. This power plant went online and it was turned off for a day or two, and then it was shut off because there were problems, there were issues with the operation of the power plant. And Lithuania, the people of Lithuania came out the hardest against it because it's on the border with Belarus and Lithuania, which is a democratic state, and the people spoke out against a new Chernobyl. And Belarus, which is an authoritarian state, and all the anti-nuclear movements have been banned. So the people kept silent and even allowed to have a nuclear power plant be built for them. Now they cannot cope with it. Very recently, about a week ago, the station was turned on for a few days and then urgently it was shut off again. And I'm saying urgently because there were several issues with its operation and they cause a threat to the entire Europe. Why am I mentioning this? I believe it's a matter of great importance, and the topic of our conversation today was very aptly chosen because our men increasingly show off their weaponry and uh, until I went into emigration when the revolution started in Belarus, when you turned off TV, it is one leader showing off a new tank and then a new bomber and a new submarine, even though we were living through a pandemic which was in full swing by that time, something that cannot be seen, something that cannot be heard, very much like Chernobyl. But it made us all get hidden in our caves. It made us admit being powerless against this new threat. And those tanks and missiles and machine guns, all of those are toys compared with Chernobyl, but somehow humanity is very difficult to be taught. It wouldn't learn that and even after Chernobyl and the pandemic, it's trying to live very much in the way it had lived in before Chernobyl, before COVID. So people don't learn lessons from the experience they get. They don't learn from the examples around them. When I went to Fukushima, people were also taken aback. When you watch TV and I hear military men take the stand, they pretend that none of those things had happened. I'm talking about Chernobyl and Fukushima and the pandemic. To me, it gives great joy to see women who are trying to find a new language of communication. They are looking to find names to our new feelings that we need to find with the help of each other so as to prevent and to a tragedy and to warn every person on the planet that we have entered into an age of new trials. Maybe it is up to women to find new words that would make people stop and give it some thought. The way we were looking for those names, in the very same way, each and every woman has to find the new words. Because if we do not find those new words to express our new feelings, if art and philosophy do not speak of the new world that has arrived, if we don't speak out against the new threat, if we try to sweep it under the rug and pretend it's not there, even though this new threat is something we cannot cope with immediately. I believe it's only through the words of women that this can be done. Women are the givers of life. And that is why women are in a position to find those new words and to speak in a much more clear language about the hierarchy of values. And to say that unless we understand that we live in a new world, of which we know even less than we used to in the past, this would be a path of suicide. And it is maybe because women give life, their words will be heard. I remember when I was writing my book, I heard from both educated and simple women, I would hear words that even to me, who had dedicated my life to the study of this red utopia, very often I would have tears in my eyes, but it's not enough to cry. You have to think and to speak with each other. Thank you.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Светлана.
Thank you, Svetlana.
Svetlana, I just want to express our deepest gratitude for what you've just shared and to remind us that Chernobyl is still a nuclear war extended in our time, that it's still with us today, and that we as women, as the givers of life, can find those words. And thank you for showing us in the most extraordinary way how to do this with your words, the gift of your words for all of humanity for all time. So thank you. I'd now like to welcome Mary Olson. And Mary, I just want to thank you for bringing to the United Nations and to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons your findings of why women and girls are disproportionately impacted by nuclear weapons. And I'd really love for you to share now why gender matters in the atomic age.
Thank you, Cynthia. I do have slides, but I just want to point out that we don't yet know why. Why is the big unanswered question of the information I'm going to share. I apologize for four-leggeds here. Do I have a screen share going? They're howling, what can I say? My name is Mary Olson. Gender and Radiation Impact Project is a relatively new organization, but the work that I'm doing on this started with the explosions of nuclear power reactors in Fukushima, Japan, and certainly my own connection goes back to 1986 and what was happening at Chernobyl. I added this slide because Svetlana writes about imprint on Earth, and the cesium is invisible. So these are reconstructions of Europe on the left, closer to the time of the accident, the event in Chernobyl, and on the right, a more local image of Fukushima Daiichi's cesium contamination. Radioactivity is invisible, but we can see the damage that it does to these chromosomes. And now I will forever see that as imprint on time, as Svetlana also says. I have a peer-reviewed paper in 2019. I direct you there for citations. There's a long set of them. We have to start with this picture because I rely on data from the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It tears my heart to use this data. This mushroom cloud is not a picture of the bomb. It's what was moments before, houses and trees and girls and boys and men and women. It was the city of Hiroshima, and my government decided to use the first nuclear weapons on cities full of people. And the data of the survivors is used widely by me here today. And I wish this history had never happened, but it is the only data set that includes people of all ages and both genders. Worker studies simply cannot tell us anything about age and gender. And so I continue, and I use this data with my heart tearing. Radiation is harmful to male bodies. Radiation is more harmful to female bodies. These findings come from the data of the survivors, which is published in 2006 in a report by the National Academy of Science. I did not collect any data. All of it is in this report. And it focuses solely on cancer, even though there are many, many other impacts from radiation exposure. We know that radiation is more harmful to children, particularly young children, because they're growing and their cells are dividing and DNA is more damaged in that state, as well as the fact they're smaller. So the same amount of radiation is a higher dose. The survivors were tracked for 60 years by the time I saw the data. They were grouped in the age groups they were in 1945 when exposed. So when I'm talking about children, we're talking about exposure as children. The cancers came across their lives. Boys grew up and got some cancer. There's a huge surprise that the girls who grew up got twice as much cancer as did the boys in the same groups. This is a big deal in biological research when something doubles, and we do not yet know why. Amongst those who were exposed as adults, there's also a difference. For every 2 men who died of cancer, 3 women died of cancer, 60 years of data across their lifetimes. In the United States, we still use a reference man. The regulators use him to evaluate exposure, to assess compliance with regulation. And he's defined by 6 parameters. Using reference man, however, for radiation regulation, results in systematic underreporting of radiation harm for the global population. The children and the women and those numbers I just shared with you are completely invisible to decision makers today in the United States. And the rest of the world has slight modifications that are not very much better. So this is new information still. And she is not protected. And many regulators treat little girls as a subpopulation, whereas we are in an inextricable link in a life cycle, which if not protected, will have dire consequences into future generations. Cynthia mentioned the treaty, the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I have this motherly pride about. I hope I get to tell more stories about that little bit of history for me. But the treaty in its preamble says that nuclear weapons have a disproportionate impact on women and girls, including as a result of ionizing radiation. So again, why? We don't know, and we need a new generation of researchers in institutions of excellence to take this on, because reference man assumes that everyone who's exposed to radiation is a reference man. We need to retire him, give him a gold watch. And for the next year, I'm working with a team to start the process of defining a reference girl. She'll swap for reference man. We don't have to change the regulatory basis. But this is just a first step, because clearly we also need to protect reproduction. Thank you for the opportunity to share today, and I look forward to talking a lot more.
Mary, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's really devastating as a woman and as a mother to take this information in, that wherever nuclear weapons are used, tested, mined, manufactured, stored, or transported, women and girls are more likely to get sick and die than men. So it's so important, and to change that regulatory structure to reference girl. Thank you. Nadezhda, I'd like to welcome you back now to introduce our next honored speaker, Olga. So if you want to come back on.
Я счастлива также. Do you hear me? Я счастлива также.
I am very happy to introduce a wonderful researcher who has a PhD in philosophy, a researcher of gender issues and Russian feminism. She's also the executive director of the Gorbachev Foundation, Olga Zdravomyslova. For many years, she's been trying to expand our understanding of gender, of today's reality, and to remind us of very important issues that we sometimes forget.
Ольга.
Can you hear me now? My mic is on. Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. I would like to thank Nadia and, of course, Cynthia for having initiated this very important conversation. Because it is not often that we have conversations like this, if you think about it. And if you think about the problems that I'm involved with for quite an extensive period of time, I have to say that the danger of a nuclear conflict, this scary threat that has been looming over humanity for several decades, is not a central topic in the feminist movement. We don't talk about it directly, but if you think about it, feminism is also about this, because it's based on the understanding, on a vision of social cohesion and peace as a peace or the world that is based on a certain hierarchy of values, and that being a patriarch society, and that's an arrangement where power and strength come first. And feminism that has had several stages or waves in its history, feminism stands for creating a new world that would be based on another balance of values. Feminism questions this hierarchy of values, and the war is the most blatant and a barbaric expression of a patriarch uh, society. It is also something that put if you put power and strength as a cornerstone of your society, you can end up destroying humanity. So this is the topic that we're all discussing today, is an is an inseparable part of today's agenda. The fourth wave of feminism has the problem of violence at its center. Violence, this is something that makes the problem of power even more acute. It brings forth the problem of freedom. So this is not all about women only. It's about women and men, because all of us must be aware that patriarch society is not supported by men only. There's a great number of women that also support that kind of society. And therefore, feminism is trying to find an idea that would be universally accepted. So we have to be aware um, of something that we started talking about it. Women are those who give birth, who bring in life into the world. That's why they have to fight for this new world, and I'm all for it. But as a sociologist, I understand very well that women are sometimes a problem as well, because in their minds, in their heads, they have the same values as men do. And even though they may be in favor of peace, but still there are some kind of illusions that they have in their way of thinking. So the contemporary version of feminism is trying to reach out and resolves that problem as well, which is a very painful issue. Um, Idealization of women, idealization of motherhood sometimes disorients us. And it is also used by the patriarchs. So if women are more aware and more cognizant of the constant danger of war, which is waged literally with weapons, um, uh, as well as by psychological and economic means. If you think about it, if women think about it, um, then you will realize that women must contribute to the resolution of this problem, and we will maybe avert the nuclear catastrophe a little bit to some extent. So this past year, I'm talking about 2020, was an incredible, unprecedented year in the history of humanity. The year of the pandemic. It is increasingly associated with war. And I hear this comparison very often. You may have heard it as well. So I believe that we should be aware of this incredible experience that we're going through is comparable to a world war. And this experience radicalizes our perception and makes all the problems even more acute. But all the gender researchers have started talking about the pandemic being something that supports the patriarchal society. Instead of undermining it, it makes it stronger. At the same time, the pandemic, the way we see it, um, increases the division of the world. Um, uh, it revives the Cold War, and the Cold War is indeed a step towards the nuclear catastrophe. Uh, it being cold should not be something that will console you. You remember what Mikhail Gorbachev did at the end of the 1980s, and then President Reagan and President Bush, all of those who were able to avert the threat of the nuclear catastrophe and end the Cold War. That was also a unique experience. So this idea of the new world, the movement toward the new world, that is what happened at that time, and the world with a new hierarchy of values. So it is all interconnected nowadays. And I believe the agenda that we are shaping now, including in the course of our conversation, is not just important, it is becoming a key agenda, a fundamental agenda for today's world, both for women and for men. That's how I see it. So everybody who thinks about it, who studies it, including writers, scientists, journalists, those involved in natural sciences or in the study of humanities, in their own way, they are making a contribution. So I believe to us it would be very important to expand the circle of individuals who could potentially become part of our dialogue. From what we have heard so far, uh, it is very important to hear the perspectives of people of different professions with different job descriptions, and this is the unification of such points of view that I believe is of paramount importance. Thank you very much.
Olga, I'm so grateful to you for planting so many seeds for our discussion and for really showing us how it's all connected now as we're in this pandemic, that everything has become more exaggerated, all the issues that we had before the pandemic, and that it's brought to the fore the need for women to come forward and with the feminist values that you mentioned to create a new world of values. It's more important now than ever in this pandemic that's disproportionately impacted women and girls with violence worldwide. So, and also the planting the seed that how we expand our circle to include a diversity of women from all backgrounds and professions and ages and walks of life. Thank you. Katrina, I now want to welcome you to share your wisdom. You've given so much over so many years to improving US-Soviet and now US-Russia relations, continuing today at this increasingly dangerous time to bring your powerful, eloquent voice to restoring sanity and humanity to relations, encouraging a national conversation in our country and an international conversation. So thank you, and we welcome you now to share your wisdom.
Cynthia, thank you for those beautiful words, but I'm so deeply honored to be on this call with Svetlana Alexievich and all of you. I sometimes have a feeling, and this is to paraphrase someone, that the old world order is disappearing and the new one is yet to be born. And I think in this last year, I don't need to tell you, we come together at an extraordinary moment, but the cruelty of the pandemic, which all of us have spoken about, has revealed what I would say pre-existing conditions in our country and in other countries, the poverty, the lack of care, especially for women and children. And there is now a new idea in America called a caring economy, which is to invest in human infrastructure, childcare, education, elder care, and bring that together. I find some hope in that. I'm also greatly worried by the disconnect I see in my country, the disconnect between a domestic policy of care and a continuing foreign policy still largely predicated on the obsolete Cold War, increased military spending, and possibly an escalating arms race. This would be a terrible waste. I mean, as Cynthia and all of you have spoken about, this should be a time to reimagine a new kind of security, a human security, and not one based on what I think Svetlana Alexievich spoke about, these broken toys. You see on TV, these military men with their toys, often men, and how they take pride in that as opposed to rebuilding a human infrastructure. So our countries have differences, we know that, but we're also bound by these existential challenges. 90% of the world's nuclear arsenal in the control of two countries. So as you know, we have to find a way to speak to each other. And as I appreciate Olga, because I do think we need to expand the circle to men who also care. My friend Cora Weiss often says it takes more than ovaries to be a woman of peace and justice. That's Cora Weiss. But I think, you think of Mikhail Sergeyevich, and I think he's done penance for Chernobyl, one hopes, but he speaks about a world without nuclear weapons. And he says, if we don't attempt what seems impossible, we will risk facing the unthinkable. He knows that war is a failure of policy. So to bring in those who share our values, I think is critical. But at the root, and Cynthia, and you have thought of this, our problems are intersectional, cannot be addressed by military might. I do think women are often more effective at collaboration over conflict, engagement over isolation, and cooperation over hostilities. And women have been at the center of vital exchanges, which we need to keep going. I will leave it to Colette, Nadia to speak to the role of Oui Mui, a mighty small publication played at a different time in speaking to violence against women, domestic shelters, to nuclear issues. And that is valuable today. We know what to do to reduce nuclear risk. I mean, take weapons off hair trigger alert, all the steps, reduce or rid ourselves of ICBMs, as we did an entire class of weapons when Gorbachev and Reagan negotiated the end of INF. But how to engage a new generation, how to address a new language, how to address the fact that we confront a more dangerous Cold War without any real public debate, dialogue in our media or politics. How might we once again see 1 million people in Central Park, as happened in 1982, the largest at that time US protest in America? The nation had a small group of people, but 1 million people. What are the new forms of storytelling? Svetlana Alexievich and oral history, I think, is extraordinarily valuable to bring in voices we would not otherwise hear. I think you said simple people or educated people, but we're not talking to simple people because we have to get beyond, in our country, the sort of bubble, the Beltway. And Colette has done that for years. And I think there's a moment now to travel countries and speak to people and in new modes. In 1983, there was a 3-hour film on ABC News called The Day After. It was very important. More people than go to the Super Bowl, watch the Super Bowl, watch this film. And it did contribute to millions protesting and to the negotiations over the IMF. So popular culture, I think, has a role to play in a smart way. And I never ignore mothers. I mean, I began by talking about what Olga said, bring in men, but You know, the role of mothers fighting war for human rights, for peace, is well known, as Svetlana Alexievich knows so well, Plaza de Mayo to Chechnya. And I was reminded of the role mothers played in getting Kennedy in 1963 to pass the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. That was women in the United States discovering a relationship of above ground atmospheric nuclear testing and babies' teeth. They sent their babies' teeth to a scientist researching strontium-90. He researched it, found high levels. Women got newspaper editors, other modes today, to write about this, and persuaded mothers to petition President Kennedy, and he signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. There's something in there without cheapening the extraordinary value of mothers to find a role. And then finally, the climate emergency. Climate crisis has moved thousands of people across the globe and in my country, and astonishingly young people. And you know, I think back to 1982, how do we knit these existential crises together? I mean, the climate crisis cannot be ignored, but nor can the nuclear crisis. And we have to find a way to bring those together. And extended, by the way, to those who also think deeply about racial, economic, social justice, because without finding a way to reinvest what is spent on so much waste, military waste, we're not going to have a country that is caring. So I think it's time, as Svetlana Alexievich said, to expose the impotence of military might, especially in this savage year of cruelty of pandemic. It's a time to have dialogue, exchanges in Zoom or in person between our two countries, but also the many other women in countries committed to peace and justice. So I'm really grateful that you've invited me above all for a discussion to think about how we can really make a difference in terms of peace and care and kindness, which is a word too often underused, thinking about the idea of language and words. Thank you.
Katrina, thank you for bringing so many threads together in what you've just shared. And, you know, you talk about the pandemic revealing the pre-existing conditions, which is, and you've touched on all of those conditions that are with us and are going to need to change and be threaded together. So, and bringing in the young people and the next generation, again, circling back to what Olga said, expanding our circle. Yeah. And so with that, I want to thank you. And then we're going to move on to our discussion. And I want to go to the first question that we have, which is, what most concerns you about nuclear weapons, nuclear risks, and US-Russia relations? And what are the stakes and costs of not cooperating to reduce the threat of nuclear war? And Colette, I wanted to call on you to see if you'd like to start this conversation. Are you there, Colette?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thanks to all of you who have spoken with your very thoughtful comments. I've made notes about them. I would like to begin our discussion of question one by going back very briefly to where we've come from in the last half century. Because although this is familiar to many of you, I think there is a lesson in here. There is a wisdom that may be useful to us in going forward. In 1963, the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the numbers of nuclear missiles and nuclear warheads in each of our countries had risen so high as to be totally insane. Something had to be done. And our leaders in the two countries began to negotiate using the new arms control concepts that were being devised. And as Katrina pointed out, we started with the limited nuclear test ban that women, I didn't realize, had a role in at that time. And then there was after that the banning nuclear weapons in outer space. And then the next one, I think, had to do with discouraging proliferation of weapons between countries. And then, of course, it went on and on and on to the big reductions in warheads and missiles, which came in the 1980s at the time of Gorbachev and Reagan and on into the 90s. So over more than 30 years, really almost 40 years, we negotiated one after another, agreement and treaty, creating what I like to call a web of protection, and creating a kind of nuclear order where there had been nuclear chaos before. Now, it may seem strange to you, even the term nuclear order, but remember that it served to, one, first of all, prevent a deliberate use of nuclear weapons, as we had done in 1945. And secondly, it prevented, I think, a nuclear war coming about by accident, because we can think about, false alarms that Cynthia's talked about in Hawaii, about possible collisions between airplanes and possible collisions between submarines. So part of this agreement was to warn one another about things and try to avoid those accidents. And we probably don't even know the whole story about how many avoided accidents there were. Now, think about it. This web of protection was achieved by a communist country, the Soviet Union, and a non-communist country, the United States, whose leaders disagreed about practically everything else in their relationship. But they did not let that stop them from continuing to negotiate reductions. That's a very interesting point, I think. There is a lesson in this. There is a kind of wisdom in all of this. We humans are capable of holding in our minds conflicting ideas, contradicting ideas, whether it's situations or relationships, and we can function very well that way. We don't have to have everything harmonizing. So we can put aside things we don't agree upon and focus on what we can do and what we have to do. My husband, for whom arms control was really close to his heart, tried to express this in what he called a bumper sticker that we would all carry on the backs of our cars. And it was embrace complexity. Embrace complexity. I love that. So to begin answering question number one, what concerns me that about US-Russian relations and the nuclear weapons is that the relations are so poor. We should try, of course, to improve them, bring about exchanges and some of the things we once had, but they might even get worse. We have to think about that possibility. And I am concerned that this might detract us from, or it might slow us down from negotiating on the weapons we now have that are much more complex and include cyber weapons and some more proliferation, although it's not as bad as it was predicted to be. We have not had any negotiations to speak of for the last 11 years. So New START, the last of the major negotiations in that extraordinary run of treaties and decrees, we have extended for another 5 years. And that gives us an opportunity to to expand that treaty, to bring in these new weapon systems, maybe to bring in the Chinese when they're ready in other countries. I think we need to awaken women. I believe that women awakened to the danger of nuclear weapons will help us keep our leaders' feet to the fire so that they will continue to negotiate, no matter how bad our relations are. Women are especially good at complexity in their daily lives. And so let us remember that women can embrace complexity, that bumper sticker. And I pause here because I really want to hear what the rest of you have to say.
Thank you, Colette. To embracing complexity and women awakening to help us keep our leaders' feet to the fire to get the reductions that we need for life. I'd like to open this question up to others who would like to speak, and I particularly would like to call on the nuclear experts that we have present with us today. We have Yelena Chernyenka and Natalia Zhurina, and we've got Jessica Slate and Emma Claire Foley from Global Zero. And I just would really like to hear if you all would like to share what you see from the expert community with respect to the issues that we've raised in this question.
I can continue if no one is against that. My name is Natalia. I come from Russia. I work at the Organization for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and in the Caribbean. What is of my greatest concern in the US-Russian relations nowadays, talking about the nuclear component of this, is that 90% of the entire nuclear arsenals is in the hands of those two countries. And there is no wish from either party to reduce those arsenals. All the agreements relating to the reduction of nuclear weapons were adopted. I will repeat because my internet is a little bit unstable. All the agreements and treaties that were adopted between Russia and the United States relating to the reduction of nuclear weapons were adopted during the Gorbachev-Reagan era, and at present we only have one agreement, and even that one was extended with a lot of difficulty. So I don't see any wish to reduce the nuclear arsenals on either party, from either party. And what also upsets me a lot is that the public, the population of Russia and the United States are not concerned by this problem. No one is thinking about the threat of a nuclear war. Everybody thinks about it as something like from the past, because during the Cold War, the threat of a nuclear war was something that everybody was talking about. In the United States, there were duck and cover drills in schools. And kids knew what to do in case they heard a warning of a nuclear attack. So that threat was something that everybody talked about, and there were many movies produced at the time, such as The Day After, the film that influenced a lot of people, including politicians. And this film made a lot of people rethink their position with regard to nuclear weapons. There's such a notion as the bulletin, the publication called the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences. It's a journal, and there's also a website where they publish various articles. They also hold a nuclear the doomsday clock, which they hold every year. So they're trying to adjust the clock that shows how far away we are from a nuclear catastrophe. So during the Cold War and during the Caribbean crisis, when the world was on the brink of a nuclear war, that clock, which is set by scientists of different countries, it's a very technical process that people handle with great care. So at that point, that clock showed the time 2 minutes before midnight, whereas the midnight is the nuclear catastrophe, the start of a nuclear war. Nowadays, despite the fact that normal citizens have somehow forgotten that problem. Now we have 100 seconds before midnight. So scientists feel that we're now closer to the nuclear catastrophe than we were during the times of the Cold War. And I believe it is up to us to get engaged with education and information and tell people how scary, how devastating that threat is. And now, more than ever, it is very, very dangerous. And I'm sure that judging by the list of questions that Cynthia has sent out to us, we will continue with the discussion of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia, for reinforcing what Katrina said about popular culture and all the other issues you've raised covering this history and the lack of awareness that's such a big problem that ties into engaging youth and the rest of the culture. I'd really like to invite Jessica and Emma Claire to share, and I just, if you can, for a moment here on this question. And I want to plant this seed. It's very important for me to plant this seed with all of you that Jessica and Emma Claire are with an organization called Global Zero that is committed to the elimination of nuclear weapons. And with the late, great giant in the field, Bruce Blair, who we all dearly miss, we lost last year, they have really come up with a sound and verifiable pathway to get to zero nuclear weapons, with the United States and Russia taking the lead, that shows us the way. So I would just want to welcome you and plant that seed with all of us here in this session right now, because that will take us down to the level of China. And that's, we're not going to get anywhere until we come down to that level. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. I'm really happy to be here with all of you, and really happy that there's an opportunity to have such a wide-ranging and open discussion between participants from the U.S. and Russia. It's an increasingly rare opportunity. I want to echo everything that's been said so far. I think these points are really key, especially about questions of public engagement. And I want to make two additional related points. First of all, I think it's important to underscore that the state of US-Russia relations right now and the discussions we're having about nuclear weapons and nuclear risk and this whole range of issues is really a product of the present. We're constantly, I think across the board talking about these issues with reference to the end of the Cold War, the 80s and 90s, kind of a golden age of disarmament and reaching across ideological and national borders to resolve these really pressing questions. And I mean, I think this is deployed in the service of good aims, restarting these discussions, re-enlivening this relationship, but also on the side of people who don't share these aims, I think, with the same urgency. But I want to say that, as has been underscored already, the fact that we've, the past 10 years have seen a precipitous decline in any sort of conversation around arms control and disarmament between the two countries is something that, people who are, that is being sustained by people who are in power today, by those in government who are choosing to take, and in, military positions who are choosing to take these escalatory steps. One thing that this seems to produce that's really incredible to me is that there's almost a, even the suggestion of conducting dialogue on any level between the two countries is often met with accusations or implications of a lack of seriousness. I think we're seeing these questions right now as we're talking about Russia policy in the Biden administration. And I think that one key point that I want to make about reducing nuclear risk between the US and Russia is the importance of having channels of communications at all levels, whether it's something less formal and like this, which I think could be very generative in a bunch of directions, or something as simple and direct as military to military links, or negotiate, a more formal negotiation for a treaty or something like that. I mean, all of these things work together so that when you get to these key moments of decisions, a false alarm or anything like that, there are links open and there's trust between the two parties so that these issues can be resolved and not result in escalation. So I think, as we open this up and we, try to bring in more, and especially younger people who are interested in taking part of this conversation, it's important to really lead with a new norm, inspired by all our different experiences and our senses of what this relationship has been and can be, where conversation, where communication, and a willingness to seek consensus is really the foundation of the relationship, is really the first step and the absolute prerequisite moving forward, rather than, something seen as almost radical.
Thank you, Emma Claire, for bringing that key point of opening channels of communication at all levels, that it's really existential, and doing it on the basis of seeking consensus. That's great. Jessica, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, and I would also like to echo everything that everybody is saying, and thank you so much, Cynthia and Nadezhda, for bringing us together for this conversation. Just real quick, I think that as Katrina mentioned, we know the solutions to this problem. We know the solutions to reducing nuclear risk and to getting on track for disarmament. It's just that these things are being ignored, more or less. And I feel like, ignorance is bliss until it's not. And that until it's not is a nuclear explosion or a nuclear test or something like that. So we definitely don't want to get there. And I've been kind of percolating these thoughts for a little while of just, we're still at the numbers where there are still security-based arguments for why the US and Russia can come down. We don't need 50 targets on Moscow. Why do you have so many nuclear weapons? Let's get down. And doing that in a way that, if you believe in nuclear deterrence, you can at least agree with us there. But after this next step that Global Zero has to bring the US and Russia down to a level where we're bringing in China and in the UK and France, then we really have to start pulling those threads of what security means. And this is what everybody has been talking about on this call of, you can't base your security on threats of mass destruction. We should be working together. The pandemic was an opportunity, a global opportunity for people to cooperate on making sure that everybody has access to vaccines and access to PPE and all of these other things. And we kind of dropped the ball. We didn't kind of drop the ball, we dropped the ball. So I think that as difficult, I still think, as getting back on track in terms of reduction and disarmament is going to be, I think that it's going to be even more difficult after that to really start to untangle what it is we really believe in as humanity, and in terms of what our security is. And I think there's a common thread that connects to social justice and climate change and feminism, of just being ignored by those in power. And I think for us to really empower our leaders, and I don't just mean, political leaders or Hill leaders, I mean like civic leaders, just leaders across the board, young leaders. I think we really need to give them the tools and the confidence to speak up against the people who are grasping on to power, who believe in these Cold War, strategies and who believe in these nuclear deterrence strategies. I kind of feel it as like they have their fingertips like just grasping on, and we're like one by one peeling off their fingers a little bit to say, you can let go. It's okay. We'll be okay. So I think that's kind of where we are at this point.
Jessica, I'm again grateful to you for mentioning and bringing again how we, as Katrina said, how we define and reimagine security for this time, and the importance of giving people who are scared in power the tools and the awareness and the education that ignorance is bliss until it's not, and that we can be secure without all of these nuclear weapons. And in fact, they're making us less secure, and tying in all of those intersectional issues that you raised. Now, I want to check in with everyone because this has been amazing. And it's, in terms of time, we're about 10 minutes away from when the original session was scheduled to end. So Nadezhda, I want to check in with you. We've got 2 other areas that we have planned to touch on. So what would we like to do as a group? I want to open this up and see if we want to extend, or whether we want to jump to the last question and come back to the intersectional question at another time. How are we feeling? Nadezhda, what is your thinking?
I think we could ask our participants if we can. Probably will extend our discussion 10 minutes more or something. What let's ask what people think. To not stop in the middle of discussion.
Right. So
or maybe to think what we could postpone for the next, and to plan some next steps.
Okay, so how is everyone feeling? Can we extend for another 10 minutes or so? Will that work for everyone?
We're gonna need more than 10 minutes.
I know.
But we'll at least
go 15, 20.
15.
Yeah, well, let's say 15, and people who need to leave can go. And the interpreters, I will obviously be grateful to you and work with you on this after the session. So it looks like everyone is looking to extend. So I just want to go then briefly touch on the next question on intersectionality, and maybe hear from some people we haven't heard from yet who might have something to say about intersectionality. I know we have here on the call Brenna, and you have things to say about that, and Yeva, how this might connect with human rights. How are nuclear weapons intersectional with feminist issues, human rights, climate change, the pandemic, and systemic racism? Many of these things have already been touched on by the panelists, but if you might want to share something that people haven't shared or elaborate on that, I would welcome you to say a few things. And then we're going to move pretty quickly, I think, to the last question, which I think is really important for us in terms of where we're going from here. Is there anyone who would like to share on this question?
Hello. Hi, this is Brenna. Yes, thank you so much. And everyone who's spoken, I feel like I'm firing on all my synapses and just learning so much from all of you, so thank you. On the intersectional question, I'm a member of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Youth Group. And I think about this question in the context of intergenerational connections, but also intersections between different issues that we've already spoken about. The question of public opinion and how to get more people engaged on this issue is one that I actually think about a lot. And one thing that I try to remind myself is just the importance of not only tying in feminism and climate change and racial justice issues into nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament movements, but also showing up for those movements.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that really stood out to me, I live in DC, and I got to witness the Women's March on Washington in 2016. And it was just an incredible event to be a part of, advocating for different forms of women's equality and human rights for women. And I knew there was a contingent of nuclear policy. I don't know if Global Zero was probably part of it, but the Arms Control Association and other NGOs based in Washington, D.C., focused on nuclear issues still came forward and kind of had their own banner and were present. And I just think as much as possible, we all agree, I assume, that nuclear weapons threaten the right to existence and the right to a peaceful existence. And so trying not to set ourselves apart from that, but really embracing it by showing up for other movements. And I think that's the way we really involve you who are clearly concerned about climate change and gun control and all these other issues. So that's kind of the challenge that I'm holding for myself right now.
Thank you, Brenna. It's so important to show up for the other movements. And that's the way we build and forge the connections to get out of our silos to work together. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. Is there anyone else who would like to say something about this question? Yeva, please, welcome. Welcome.
Hello, dear ladies. I would like to offer a roadmap. How do we act together so that we discuss this amongst ourselves, so that we have a plan for the future? So it's my suggestion to have an information campaign, and through the voices of women of different ages and different social groups, different professions, speak about the nuclear threat. If it keeps coming up in social media, on television, we will draw the attention of men, because they all use those portals, maybe even more than us. And whenever they see a short video where a wonderful woman speaks to her son or addresses men and saying, let us say no to war, let's think about it, let's do something about it. If we launch this campaign, I'm sure it will be supported by a great number of people. And I believe that we women, especially journalists, they know how to deal with that and how to present it in a significant manner, and also very accessible and very simple.
I love the idea of an information campaign. Thank you for bringing that forward and as leading us into perhaps the next question, unless someone else would like to speak on this one about where we go from here.
Very short. Could I throw in very short?
Yes, please, please.
I'm just so thrilled that we have now things to support. In my girlhood, we were against. We had to be. That's where we were. But now with a new treaty, with a reference girl, with many other aspects of this conversation, supporting women finding the words. We have identified many things today that we can be for. And I think that as we turn our attention into the future, that we need to focus on what we are for.
Thank you, Mary, what we are for and how we move forward. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to intersectionality before we move on to the last question?
Just very, very briefly, and Mary, thank you for that. I do think often the feeling of being against isn't one that inspires. And we also haven't talked about the United Nations and ICANN and the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, and there's support there to be had. But and Cynthia knows this, I've said over the years that, Cold War is very bad for thinking humane, progressive people, because it empowers the war parties on both sides. It fills coffers of military budgets, but it also narrows space for independent groups, for human rights groups, for dissidents. And I think we're seeing a narrowing now very clearly in Russia. But you see it in this country too, in the way protests is handled and the increasing militarization of some of our cities, certainly around racial issues. So I just think there's something in there to ally around intersectionally.
Thank you, Katrina, for bringing up the really important issue of the money involved here. And the intersectionality of that question, because so many things that we desperately need to put our money into, like climate change and the pandemic, and we have more nuclear warheads in the United States than hospitals, and shortages of masks, et cetera, that there is a connection there for all of the issues that we're facing today, that we're spending last year 73.1 billion in 2019 on nuclear weapons, and what we could be doing with that. So, and also I just want to say that bringing the human rights question in here, because I think it's a human right to live in a world without nuclear weapons. I think that's a human right. And I think it's a human right to be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have soil that's not contaminated, that grows our food. So there is a human rights question here. So part of this information campaign, I think, has to be intersectional with human rights and money. It's a big one. There's a divestment campaign for nuclear weapons, and I think that's going to play a big role taking us forward. So as we move into the last question, I think I'd like to just really invite everyone to speak, and Nadia, as my partner in all of this, especially, about how we move forward as a group, how we would like to continue. Yeva has spoken about bringing in more people, an information campaign, how we can do this concretely, when we meet again, that question, when we might meet again, who we want to bring in next time. We intentionally made this private and invitational and small, because we wanted to have a chance to share more intimately. But there's a growing number of people in the peace movement, finally again in the United States, who are concerned about what's going on with Russia and the Cold War rhetoric, et cetera, that's we've seen recently. So I feel like there are a lot of people who will want to watch this, if we're open to sharing this recording. And there are a lot of people who are going to want to be part of this conversation or listening to us as we move forward. So I'm going to open this question with these considerations.
We had spoken of how important it would be to have more stories about how people like yourself got awakened to the danger of nuclear war. And I'm very happy to hear that we have a website, your website, Cynthia. Could we use that for some of these stories? Could we begin to gather more of them? Because I'm sure there are many more out there. And that's one way for a lot of additional women to be part of our conversation. I think a conversation like we've had today has its limit in numbers, because we can't go on for 2, 3, 4 hours and everyone does want to speak. So, but listening to what we've said today, I would love to see people be able to do that all over the world, in fact. I think it's important that one of the goals is to delegitimize this notion that having nuclear weapons gives a country enormous power and superiority. The superiority to dictate to others, the superiority to tell them, what's right and what's wrong. This is widely believed, and somehow we've got to change that so that, as you said, human rights come to the fore. It's part of our human rights not to fear the destruction of civilization and the planet. That's one of the important goal for me. And I also another goal is to break down the barrier between experts and so-called ordinary people.
Right.
Something, Nadia, that may be stronger in your country than in ours, where if one doesn't have the right degrees or the part of the right hierarchy, one doesn't have the right to speak out about these things. I totally oppose that. I think we need to have anyone who cares about these issues able to speak out and join the conversation. So that's something to work on in however we think would be important. An informational campaign would be great, but it does need to have a site, where we can post various things, whether it's a short video or whether it's another extraordinary story. Well, I'll let others come into the conversation with suggestions.
Thank you, Colette. As always, bringing in so many important considerations. I definitely, we have a website where we can post anything, but I think that we also need to reach people through, as Yeva said, social media and articles and other YouTube and other ways. And there are many more stories that we can certainly use the Nuclear Wake Up Call.Earth and Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy websites. There's plenty of room there to host this kind of thing. So would welcome that, and would like to work in collaboration with all of you who want to put this out through other channels, through other websites, through social media, etc. And I want to just say on the issue of stories specifically, and an idea for perhaps next time is that we might consider the very powerful stories of people who have experienced either hibakusha or people who are downwinders from nuclear testing or Chernobyl survivors. I mean, connecting these threads of people, we have and there are people in many countries who can speak to this issue. So those kinds of stories that really people who have experienced the wars that happened, the actual bombings using the nuclear weapons, and those who have been part of an undeclared war, whether it's nuclear testing or Chernobyl or Fukushima. So I just want to say that all sounds great and possible. Who else would like to share?
I just pick up on something Colette said earlier. First of all, embracing complexity. It's not the high point of our cultural society or media right now, but we should adhere to it. But this is a conversation of dialogue at this moment between two countries, which, let's be honest, it's not just the weapons triumphalism. It's at the end of the first Cold War, the triumphalism that America was the unipolar power. And then the NATO expansion, which, by the way, there was a debate around. But at this moment, the demonization of Russia is at a level that I would suspect, Colette, you have not seen since there was a communist leader and a non-communist leader. And I think we need to decriminalize diplomacy, as Cynthia has said. We need to decriminalize dialogue. And I'll stop. There's a man named Matt Rajonsky, who's head of the Kennan Institute, who is currently being stigmatized as, quote, too soft on Russia, because he supports arms control agreements and an expansion of the scaffolding of arms control. So we have to deal with that culture, and demonize, I think, is important as part of our dialogue.
Katrina, so beautifully said. Agree with everything you've said. The demonization is at an extent where I'm seeing people who even go to Russia having problems when they come home. And it's really, it's reached a point that I never thought I would see in our lifetime. So who else would like to share about going forward? Anyone we haven't heard from? Irina, Yelena, I don't know if you're able to say anything at this point or whether your toddlers are still there. If you'd like to share.
Sorry, I had to switch off my video for a few minutes. I'm thrilled to be able to participate in this conversation and listening to you with all that experience and your beliefs and the wisdom. This is amazing. But let me add a bit of pessimism to this. I don't know if I'm the only person in the round not really believing that we can change things. I mean, we have seen the only thing that Russia and the US currently agree upon when it comes to nuclear is that they don't like the treaty of the prohibition of nuclear weapons. They have been fighting against that treaty together. That's like they are disagreeing on almost everything else, but not letting others strip them of their nuclear shiny toys is something that combines them, and they stand united against this treaty. So I cannot imagine what we would have to do to change even a bit, to get even one warhead more destroyed than the countries are willing to right now. There is a quite a famous, bit radical female group that is fighting for females' rights in Eastern Europe, which is called Femen. And what they do is that they sometimes just undress themselves to get attention to the problems that they are fighting for. And only that gets them into like media, and people gets them to listen to to that. So I don't know what kind of radical steps we would have to do to get attention. It's not like one more website or 10 more videos will help at all. There's so much information about nuclear dangers out there. It's amazing. You could read your lifetime, not stopping for a second. I am with you. I'm with whatever you plan to, because I truly believe that we should get rid of these dangers. I had to switch off my video for a minute to feed my kids, and I'm really afraid for their future because of the bad shape of the relations of the two most strongest nuclear countries. But I'm very pessimistic that we can do anything to really minimize that danger. I'm sorry for not being very innovative.
You know,
Можно мне возразить? Когда
May I
встречаются,
contradict?
когда встречаются русские, два русских, двое русских, обычно
When
бывает три
we have
мнения, как
a
говорят.
meeting of two Russians, there's usually 3 opinions.
Я хотела бы возразить в принципе, потому что
Let me
я
contradict in
абсолютно верю в
principle,
то,
because
что личный
I
выбор
absolutely
одного,
believe that a
5,
personal choice of 1, 2, or
10
3,
человек
or 5,
могут
or 10
изменить
people
ситуацию.
can change the
Вне
situation,
зависимости от того, Горбачев это
regardless of whether it
или
is Gorbachev
ученый, или
or
Сахаров,
a
или
scientist or Sakharov,
простой журналист,
or
журналистка
just
в газете.
a simple
Но
journalist
то,
writing for
что
a
мы видели
newspaper.
в течение
But
последних
what we have
30
witnessed in the
лет
past
и о
30
чем нам
years,
напомнило Халет в течение
and what
очень долгого
Colette
времени
reminded us of,
происходила
this has been happening
кропотливая
for a long
работа,
time, and I'm talking about
которая
meticulous work
привела к серьезным
that has
изменениям.
led to serious changes.
И я очень хорошо помню, об этом писала Катрина в
Remember
своем
that Katrina wrote about it
замечательном материале к 90-летию Горбачева.
in her wonderful material for
Горбачев
the
напомнил
90th
Рейгану, что
anniversary of Gorbachev,
договор о сокращении вооружений подписали
and
не они, а интеллигенция
it
двух
wasn't
стран.
really interesting that Gorbachev said it wasn't them who signed the agreement, but it was the intellectuals of the two parties.
Of two countries,
yes.
И, конечно, это звучит сегодня немножко
And
старомодно.
this
Сегодня
certainly
принято
sounds a little
думать,
bit old-fashioned nowadays,
что
because it is
профессионалы,
now in vogue
интеллигенция
to think that the
служат
professionals and the
разным
intellectuals
интересам.
serve different interests.
Но вот мы встретились, очень разные люди.
However, here we are, we have met and very
И
different
людей,
people.
которые хотели бы
And
в этом разговоре или в подобном разговоре участвовать, довольно много.
there are quite a lot of people who would like to be part of this conversation or something similar to this conversation.
Я абсолютно верю, что профессионализм
I
и талант
absolutely
сильнее
believe that professionalism and talent is stronger
институций.
than institutes.
I
or
believe
institutions.
that professional and dedication is stronger than institutions and even political regimes. And they could find a way. И то, что возможно найти какие-то пути.
It
Может
is
быть, мы их
possible to
сейчас не
find
знаем.
ways. Maybe we're not aware of them at the moment.
И я думаю, что наш разговор и
I
разговор о
believe that our
поиске слов,
conversation and the conversation about finding the words,
о поиске новых путей, которые
the
сегодня
search
прозвучал,
of new paths,
поможет нам найти
will help
уникальные
us
инструменты,
find unique
по
tools
крайней мере, донести
to
нашу
at
боль
least
и
bring our
нашу
pain
тревогу
across
до
and our
довольно многих людей.
concern,
Кажется, это
bring it
возможно.
over to and make a lot of people aware of that. I believe that that is possible.
И я предлагаю на следующей нашей
So I
встрече
suggest
обсудить
that
эти
at our
возможности.
next meeting, we discuss these opportunities.
И я думаю, что мы можем как следует осмыслить
I
все, что мы
believe
сегодня
that we can give a lot of
слышали,
thought and consideration to what we have heard
и
today
предложить какие-то конкретные
and
пути,
suggest some specific ways.
поскольку мы живем в информационном пространстве,
Since we live in
информация
an informational
становится
space,
чрезвычайно важной.
information becomes
Мы могли бы,
of
я
paramount importance,
поддерживаю
and
Еву, мне кажется,
I
очень
support
важно
Yeva.
доносить голоса
I
женщин
believe it is very
разных и
important to
разный
make
опыт
the
на разных
voices of
носителях
women heard through
и на
different
разных
platforms,
языках.
in different
Можно попробовать.
languages. We can try.
That's all.
I want to just acknowledge both of you, both Yelena and Nadezhda, for sharing where what you see right now and what's possible and what's not possible from your point of view. Yelena, I know that you occupy more than any Russian on the call. You're in the official space. You're not entirely in the official space, but you're connected to the official space. And I know that for many of my friends, even in the last few years, the pessimism has grown greater. But I also know that you as a mother were touched by my story and you published it, and it opened people's hearts. I had a situation with a soldier I just met, and I thanked him for a tour of an underground bomb shelter, and he said, "Thank you." I said, "What are you thanking me for?" He said, "For the story in Kommersant." So I know that you have changed, and that's what Nadezhda is talking about, and you're in a position where you can really, you can bring these stories forward, these women's stories forward. And that's the way we're going to change hearts and minds. And we need to get Hollywood involved. We need to make some kind of movie. So anyway, how would we like, it's now almost 20 minutes. So how would we like to, and Nadezhda, just for your optimism, that one word, changing one mind at a time, that bringing Gorbachev back in when everybody said it was impossible that would ever be able to not be enemies, that we saw the world change, bringing that all back to us, and Katrina, the million people in Central Park. Thank you. So when would we like to meet again? And Nadezhda, I want to also bring you back in for just the closing words, and to thank all of you for being with us, for listening, for sharing, for making this time, making yourselves available, sharing all the different wisdom that we bring together to this conversation, to our interpreters, to Tom, for the interpreters who've worked overtime today and with technical difficulties, and Tom for your management of the session. Thanks to all of you. And Nadezhda, I just want to bring you in for closing words and maybe suggesting a time we might want to get back together again.
Я думала, что я уже их
I
сказала.
thought I'd said my closing remarks,
Но
but
я хочу поблагодарить Синтию,
I would like to thank
поблагодарить
Cynthia,
Калет, Катрину,
my
Мэри,
colleagues
всех,
Katrina and
и
Mary,
американских, и русских, и
both
Светлану
my American
Алексеевич,
colleagues
которая, к
and my
сожалению,
Russian colleagues, and
должна была идти на
Svetlana that has
следующую
had to
встречу.
leave and go to another meeting.
Я почувствовала, что как будто вот много лет
I
назад мы
have
собираемся
felt
в
the
то
way
время,
I
когда мы вместе
did,
мечтали,
the way we did many years ago when
особенно
we
в
were
России, в
dreaming,
Америке,
especially in
о
Russia and in
будущем
America, when we
счастливом,
were dreaming about
совершенном
a
и
happy
безопасном
future
мире.
and a very
Произошло
safe
многое, мы
world.
узнали много печали, наполнились
We've learned
оптимизмом,
a lot
но
of
мы стали
sadness.
мудрее,
Then
и
we've
у
felt
нас
our
появились
optimism.
новые
We've become
возможности в
more
жизни.
wise,
И
and we've
я
had more opportunities.
еще раз сказать, что я
So
верю в
once
успех
again,
нашей
let me say
небольшой
that I
группы.
do believe
Я
in
не
the
могу
success
представить,
of
так
our
сказать, как
fairly small
велика
group.
она станет и что мы
I
сделаем, но то,
cannot
что это какой-то важный шаг,
imagine
и что
how
мы сделали
big
то,
it
что мы
can
должны
grow,
были сделать
but
сейчас, это, мне кажется, очевидно, это уже
it is
состоялось.
obvious that we have done what we were supposed to achieve.
И, может быть, мы встретимся, через
So
месяц или
perhaps
через
we can
полтора,
meet in a
найдем
month or a
удобное
month and
время.
a half we could find the time that is convenient. Perhaps we could focus on the Russian-American relations as a whole, or we'll take up certain aspects of feminism. So perhaps we could focus more on some specific subset of issues. And perhaps we could discuss some specific steps in the area of information, or maybe we can come up with something else. I was really happy to have had this conversation with you.
Thank you, Nadia. I think that's a great idea. Let's look to, and to Olga, all of you present, Olga, all of you present. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Deep bows of gratitude. And let's look to get together again in 6 weeks. Nadia and I will be in touch, and any others who want to be in touch after this with feedback, welcome, how we can make this better, how we can make it larger, address some of the things that we didn't have a chance in the session. We'll welcome all of that. Blessings, gratitude to all of you. Puna, mahalo, aloha. Thank you. Blessings for peace.
Thank you. Спасибо.
There are no lost causes, only causes waiting to be won.
Thank you, Katrina.